What comes to mind when you think of the most dangerous neighborhood in the United States? A place where every corner tells a story of survival, where shadows of the past collide with a grim present. Today, we're venturing into Kensington, a neighborhood in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, America's poorest big city. This is a place defined by both hardship and resilience, where crime, poverty, and addiction paint a vivid, unsettling picture of life on the edge. Let's start with Philadelphia itself. Known as the city of brotherly love, Philly boasts iconic landmarks, rich history, and of course its famous cheesesteaks. But beyond the bustling streets of Center City lies a sobering truth. Philadelphia has the highest poverty rate of any large U.S. city. Around 23% of its residents live below the poverty line, which means nearly 1 in 4 people struggle to make ends meet. And Kensington? It's at the heart of this reality, representing the city's most profound challenges. Kensington wasn't always like this. 100 years ago, it was a different story entirely. Back then, Kensington was a beacon of opportunity, known as the industrial backbone of Philadelphia. It was home to thriving factories, especially in the textile and manufacturing industries. Workers came from all over to find stable jobs, build homes, and raise families. The streets were alive with activity, and the neighborhood was a place where hard work could lead to a better life. But as the mid-20th century rolled around, things began to change. The factories started closing one by one, victims of globalization and automation. Jobs that once sustained entire generations vanished. With the economic collapse came a social one. Families moved out, leaving behind empty homes and abandoned factories. Poverty crept in, and as opportunities dried up, crime began to rise. By the 1980s, Kensington was in free fall, plagued by violence and drugs, a shadow of its former self. Today, Kensington is often called ground zero for America's opioid crisis. It's not an exaggeration to say that this neighborhood has become a symbol of the nation's struggles with addiction. Open-air drug markets operate in plain sight, with dealers peddling heroin, fentanyl, and other deadly substances on street corners. Needles litter the sidewalks, and people suffering from addiction are a common sight, many of them homeless or living in abandoned buildings. It's estimated that over 100,000 people in Philadelphia use opioids, and Kensington is the epicenter of this crisis. Walking through Kensington can feel like stepping into another world. The air is thick with desperation, but also with a strange sense of normalcy. For residents, this is just everyday life. The police presence is constant, but it's not enough to stem the tide. Drug overdoses happen so frequently that the city has installed Narcan vending machines to provide easy access to the life-saving medication. And while these measures save lives, they don't address the root of the problem. The drug epidemic in Kensington doesn't exist in a vacuum. It's intertwined with poverty, systemic neglect, and a lack of resources. Schools are underfunded, and many children grow up witnessing violence and addiction from a young age. Jobs are scarce, and for many, turning to illegal activity feels like the only option. The cycle of poverty and crime is unrelenting, trapping generation after generation in its grip. And then there's the violence. Kensington has one of the highest crime rates in Philadelphia, with shootings, robberies, and assaults happening regularly. Much of the violence is tied to the drug trade, as dealers and gangs fight for control of territory. Gunfire is a common sound, and residents often talk about staying indoors after dark, not out of paranoia, but out of necessity. The statistics are alarming, but numbers alone can't capture the reality of life in Kensington. This is a place where people live in constant fear, where parents worry about their kids walking to school, and where the sound of sirens is as common as the sound of birds chirping in other neighborhoods. But despite all of this, Kensington is not just a story of despair, it's also a story of resilience. For all its struggles, Kensington is home to people who refuse to give up. Community groups and non-profits are working tirelessly to provide support where the system has failed. They run food drives, set up shelters, and offer addiction recovery services. They help children with after-school programs and work to clean up the streets. These efforts may seem small in the face of such overwhelming challenges, but they're making a difference. Take, for example, the concept of a marae, the heart of Maori communities in New Zealand. A marae is a sacred meeting place where people come together to discuss, celebrate, and heal. In a way, Kensington's community centers are like modern-day marae. They're places of refuge and hope in a neighborhood that desperately needs both. But why can't Kensington escape its struggles? The answer is complex, rooted in decades of systemic issues. For starters, the city's response to the crisis often feels like a band-aid on a bullet wound. Sweeps to clear out homeless encampments and drug markets might make the streets look cleaner temporarily, but they don't solve the underlying problems. Without affordable housing, mental health services, and job opportunities, people just move to another corner or another neighborhood, only for the cycle to repeat itself. The economic inequality in Philadelphia is staggering. While parts of the city thrive with luxury apartments and bustling businesses, places like Kensington feel completely forgotten. It's a tale of two cities, and the gap between them keeps growing. Addressing this divide will take more than charity, it will take systemic change. Investments in affordable housing, education, and healthcare are essential. So is treating addiction as a public health issue rather than a criminal one. And yet, there is hope. Small victories are happening every day. A person finds sobriety, a child gets access to a better education, a park is cleaned up and reclaimed by the community. These moments may not make headlines, but they matter. They're proof that change is possible even in the most challenging circumstances. So why should we care about Kensington? Because it's not just about one neighborhood. Kensington is a reflection of the challenges facing many communities across the United States: poverty, addiction, violence, and systemic neglect. These problems aren't confined to one zip code. They're part of a larger story about what kind of society we want to build and who we're willing to leave behind. The people of Kensington aren't asking for pity, they're asking for a chance to rebuild, to heal, and to thrive. And while the road ahead is long, their resilience is a reminder that even in the darkest places there's light. It's up to all of us to decide whether we'll ignore it or help it grow. If you found this story eye-opening, share it. Start a conversation about what's happening in places like Kensington. Awareness is the first step toward change. And if you're inspired to take action, consider supporting organizations working on the front lines, because in the end, Kensington's story isn't just about danger and despair, it's about hope, and hope is something worth fighting for.